As part of the project management services offered at Memorial University of Newfoundland, project management resource packages, consisting of tools and templates, have been designed to aid researchers in the planning, execution, and monitoring of research project activities. This training video focuses on the project scope templates. The scope templates are of value when planning the scope of a research project and also when monitoring its progress. Project management processes and definitions outlined within this video are referenced from the Project Management Institute's Project Management Body of Knowledge, 5th edition. This training video will introduce you to the Project Scope template package, which includes the Scope Statement template and the Activity List template. Each element of the templates will be reviewed, and scenario-based examples will be provided to illustrate the use of the Scope templates. The Project Scope template package is a Microsoft Excel file, which consists of 4 tabs. These are an Instruction, Scope Statement, Activity List, and a Glossary tab. The Instructions tab provides a brief overview of the templates within the template. The purpose of the Project Scope Statement is to provide a baseline understanding of the scope of a project. The project scope defines all of the work, and only the required work, to complete the project objectives. The Project Scope Statement is a high-level overview of the research project that can be used for communication purposes. Each template has a project descriptor field that researchers can fill in. Also, an approval field is available to document when the project scope was approved by a sponsor and any associated amendments to that scope. Furthermore, a fillable scope statement field is available for researchers to document key aspects of the research project scope. Now let's take a look at each element of the scope statement in more detail. The project description is a brief, high-level overview of the project. It should include the purpose of the project and justify the linkage to the mandate of the relevant funding sponsors. Also, if applicable, any business linkages should be identified. Based on the overall purpose of the research project objectives can be identified. Project objectives summarize what is planned to be achieved through the project. Furthermore, depending on the nature of the research project and the funding sponsor, the project may have associated deliverables that can be identified here. A project deliverable is a tangible or intangible product or service that is intended to be delivered to a project sponsor or client. This could be a report, developed technology, or any other aspect of a research outcome. When documenting the scope of a research project, it may be just as important to identify what is not part of the project scope as what is. Project exclusions are those things that are outside of the project boundaries and will not be included in the project work. It is often important to identify any project exclusions at the beginning of a research project to set expectations with project stakeholders and to prevent scope creep throughout the project. A project constraint is any restriction that defines a project's limitations. For example, certain activities within a research project may be time or season dependent. Thus, some project activities may be constrained based upon the time of year. Project dependencies are the relationships between aspects of the project work, or between aspects of the project work and external project factors. For example, some project activities may be dependent on the receipt of ethics, animal care, or regulatory compliance approval. Also, some project activities may be dependent on the completion of preceding project activities. Identifying project constraints and dependencies when planning project scope is important because it will aid in the subsequent scheduling of project activities. Project assumptions are those things that are believed to be true within a project. For example, when planning project activities, certain activities may be dependent on the successful completion of preceding research activities. When planning research activities, it is assumed that research outputs will allow for you to continue with your project plan. Identifying these project assumptions during project planning is important, as these assumptions will form the basis for the project risk that exists within the project. If known, project funding details, including total project budget and funding sponsors, should be identified as part of the project scope statement. Furthermore, if known, the project plan's start and end date should also be identified. Next, we'll turn our attention to the activity list template. The activity list template can be used by the researcher to break down their project into specific objectives and the associated activities or tasks required to complete their project. When the list is completed, it will represent the work breakdown structure, or the WBS, for the project. A WBS is a breakdown of the project scope into hierarchical deliverables, or all the activities that the project will take. As with the scope statement template, the activity list template has the project descriptors listed at the top. Please note that when you complete the project descriptor field within the scope statement template, it will automatically populate in the activity list template. Now let's take a look at each element of the activity list template in more detail. Numerical coding is used in this template to identify objectives, activities, and tasks. For example, 1.0 represents an identified project objective, displayed here in gray. 1.1 represents an activity associated with that objective, displayed here in white. 1.1.1 represents a task associated with that activity, displayed here in red. Breaking down the project scope into smaller work packages aids in the scheduling, budgeting, and monitoring of project work. Please note that objectives may have many associated project activities, and an activity may have many associated tasks. The name column is where the short title of the objective, activity, or task is identified. The detailed description column provides a space for description of the work associated with each objective, activity, or task to be qualified. A hierarchical description of project objectives, activities, and tasks can aid in communicating project work within a project team and with a project sponsor. To aid in the understanding of how the activity list template can be used in planning a research project, let's take a look at an example. As you can see here, the activity list template has been completed for a 2-year project. Project work has been classified into discrete objectives and associated activities and tasks. For example, the first objective of the research project is to establish a research lab. This objective has 3 associated activities: lab space, lab equipment, and lab personnel. Each activity then has its associated tasks that are required to complete that activity. Thus, as you can see, the activity list provides a hierarchical breakdown of work associated with the research project. As stated earlier, this breakdown will aid in the scheduling, budgeting, and monitoring of project work. Inserting an objective, activity, or task within the template is straightforward. For example, suppose you wanted to insert a 4th activity under Objective 1. All you need to do is insert a new row. For example, insert a new row under 1.2.2 and label it as 1.4. As you can see, the color coding automatically codes it as a project activity. If this activity has associated tasks, you would do the same as before with the insertion of a new row and label it as 1.4.1. As you can see, the color coding automatically codes it as a project task. For this example, please note that the names and descriptors of the research activities are of a generic nature for illustrative purposes. Greater detail regarding research activity or task specifics can be provided depending on the nature of the research project. Finally, the scope package consists of a glossary tab that provides definitions of terms used in associated templates. In conclusion, the project scope package provides templates that allow for the documentation of scope for a research project and the identification of the objectives, activities, and tasks required to complete the project work. Identifying the project scope in this manner is the first step in the planning of a research project and will aid in the subsequent scheduling, budgeting, and monitoring of project activities.